Live, presented as always by Citi, alongside Gary, Keith, and Ron. I am Steve, and Citi knows the COVID-19 pandemic is intensifying the threat of hunger for millions of people across the country. That's why they're donating $2.5 million to support World Central Kitchen's Chefs for America relief effort. You can help too. Visit WCK.org to learn more. And fellas, every week we've started the show the same way. Oh, I wish we could talk about an actual baseball season. I wish we could. Now we finally can. Pretty circuitous route, but here we are with camp set to open next week. Gary, your overall thoughts on where we finally land?
Well, we land on a 60-game season that we hope can be played. Obviously, the virus is going to dictate how much of or whether the 60 games can actually be played, but at least there's hope now. I think that for all of the preliminaries with the conflict between the owners and the union, which we'll see more of with the collective bargaining agreement running out after 2021, the fact of the matter is we do have a season to look forward to, and it's going to be a unique season, one in which we'll see things we've never seen before, where the import of every game will be unbelievably large, and where the Mets are going to have a chance to be very, very competitive. But I think that's true of almost every team in that short a season. I think it's going to be different. I think it's going to be memorable. I just hope we can get there and play through it without the virus taking hold to a point where it's not feasible.
Ron, when you look at the structure, the 60 games, but also all the rule changes and how different it'll be, are there certain things that you really like about this new look season and others that, bother you a little bit?
Steve, I'm trying to keep an open mind. This season was going to be a different kind of season anyway. So I think it's so easy to find the negative. A 30-year schedules against the AL East. I mean, you could find so many things, the universal DH, whatever. But I'm trying to keep an open mind and have fun and treat this as just kind of a volleyball kind of year. See what happens. See if someone hits 400 over 60 games. I was looking up some stats, and in 2004, Ichiro, over a 60-game block in 2004, hit 453. So maybe someone will hit 400. Not that it'll count, but someone might. Maybe someone will have an ERA like Jacob deGrom under 1.12. There could be a lot of interesting things that happen. How meaningful they are, I don't know, but I think it'll be fun just to cover it.
Keith, what about you?
Well, I think in terms of, you look at, you're going to have the universal DH, National League teams, GMs, they mold their teams differently, or you don't need as much bench, but you always have a DH in place. You plan ahead for that in the American League. A lot of the National League teams, the bench is much more needed, but you're paying a lot of players, and we see a lot of weak benches in the National League on the lower tier teams. The Mets are fortunate that they have Cespedes. Now it doesn't have to play in the field. He can DH, and if he's healthy, boy, oh boy, does he bring a power bat.
Gary, when you look at this universal DH rule, I think it's pretty obvious that a lot of teams will benefit from that in the NL in terms of what they can do with their lineups. Even in the Mets' own division, you look at, the Nationals maybe being able to put Howie Kendrick in there every day and what he could do playing on an everyday basis. But with the Mets, and not just Cespedes, but, a Dom Smith, a JD Davis, some of the versatility that Jeff McNeil has, are they uniquely set up in your mind to take advantage of the DH this season above a lot of the teams that they're competing with?
Well, I think Cespedes changes the equation because I think how that equation plays out depends on his ability not just to swing the bat, which I think we know he still has, but whether he can play the field. Because let's face it, if your plan is to play J.D. Davis most days in left field, if Cespedes is even 80% of what he was, he is a monumental improvement in terms of playing left field. Still has one of the best left field arms in the game. And if he can move around at all, that gives you a whole different option. I think the Dodgers are in a similar position to the Mets, where they just have so many weapons that they can throw at you, and they'll benefit greatly from the DH. But I think the Mets are in a good spot. Even giving Alonso a day off or two from playing first base, I think that's a big plus. To me, what's even more interesting than that is the way teams are going to utilize their personnel. Obviously, pitching aside, because they're going to have a shorter time to prepare, and you're going to have expanded rosters, and I think pitching is going to be used in very creative ways. But as far as the everyday players are concerned, on a lot of teams, sports science has taken over in terms of deciding when guys have off days. Those are my Great Danes barking in the background.
They don't agree with you right now. They're not liking the points.
They are heartily endorsing everything that I'm saying. But anyway, so we've seen teams where players have to have a day off every 12 days because that optimizes their performance over a long season. I'm wondering whether that kind of stuff gets thrown out the window with a 60-game season, and whether we might see guys go wire to wire. There's no reason why a player can't play all 60 games if he's so inclined without a drop off in performance. At least that's the way I look at it. I don't know if I'm sure that the sports science guys are going to work on that and trying to figure out that stuff right now. But I think that might make the games more interesting in some respects, because you get to see the better players in there on an everyday basis. At least I'm thinking that's the way it's going to go.
You get to see them in there on an everyday basis, assuming that all the better players are playing. And I know that we talked a little bit about this beforehand. And Gary, you were saying that you don't expect many, if any, players to opt out of playing this season, but it certainly is an option. It's been a discussion. And so Keith and Ron, from a player's perspective, if it was you and you were going into this season, how would you go about making that call, whether to play or opt out of the year?
Go ahead, Keith.
That's a tough question. We were talking earlier, you got family, you go to the ballpark, you've got to come home, you've got wife and kids. It's got to be a big concern. It would be a tough decision, and I'm sure that it would be fully supported by the family. I would probably would go ahead and play. I mean, it's the game we love, and just take all the precautions that you can. Get home and make sure that you're washing your hands, you're wearing a mask all the time, and doing all the things that you possibly can do. Because we do love the game, and even though it's a 60-game schedule, I'm sure I'd be chomping at the bit to play.
Steve, I would play too. You have to look at it that it's the vulnerability of a 25-year-old me as opposed to the 60-year-old me is a lot different, right? You would feel that you wouldn't be as much in harm's way. Second, I think one thing I would do, I would really consider putting myself in a bubble, though. Maybe staying away from the family, having them stay away from me, because I wouldn't want to infect them. And I think, the more elements you include in this, exponentially your chances of getting it or giving it go up. But I think, that's what we do. Ball players who play ball. I don't know what else we do.
But of course, the concerns are about guys who, are more vulnerable, guys who are diabetic or they have heart conditions. There's a lot of players, or at least a handful of players in those categories. If you read over the protocols that Major League Baseball is putting into place, it's a 101-page document. They have done a meticulous job about making sure that every potential contact between players and coaches, between coaches and front office people, clubhouse people, it's all covered in the document. So I think that the in-ballpark protocols are going to really do everything that they possibly can to keep people safe when they're there. The problem is, and Ronnie touched on it, players go home. And even if the players are meticulous about not going to bars and restaurants, not going into crowded spaces, if you're home with your family and your wife goes to lunch with some friends, or your kids have a play date, now you have the potential of exposure. you go to the ballpark and players are being tested every other day, not every day. So now it's the day that you're not tested, you've gotten it, you give it to half of your teammates, you've got a problem. So that's where the danger lies. When they talked back in March or whenever we were talking about it, about putting the whole league in a bubble in Arizona, that was going to be difficult enough. But now that you have players going home, it's going to be awfully hard to maintain that level of vigilance away from the ballpark.
And that really is the main difference when you talk about Major League Baseball versus the NBA, the NHL, their restart plans. They're able to put everybody into that bubble, given the fact that essentially it's just the playoffs. They just have to finish their season, but it is a different scenario. And the one thing that really has not been covered in that manual is what it would take to stop play. Is it one player? Is it two players infected? If you have a situation like the Phillies have right now, if that happened in the regular season, are you just filling in with the taxi squad and plowing ahead, or do you shut down that team for a couple of weeks? There's no real answer, and I don't know if anybody really knows the answer.
I think that they're keeping that fluid. Ronnie can speak to it maybe better than I can, but that's why you have 60-man roster pools, right? So that you can dip in and replace players. But I think baseball probably has a number in mind. How many players on a team need to be infected before they shut that team down for a couple of weeks. But I don't know, Ronnie, do you have any better idea of that?
I don't have any better idea. And one of the things that we were talking about, I was talking about with someone before, the new trading deadline is August 31st now. What do you do when you trade for a guy? I mean, you're not going to quarantine him, obviously, but that's a difficult thing. There's just so many layers to this. And I think one thing that we have to recognize, people are going to get sick. We're seeing it on the PGA Tour now, is that they've had 3 or 4 people tested positive in the 2.5 weeks that they've gotten this thing going. They're in Connecticut today. People are going to get sick. And I think the protocol of keeping people healthy is as important as the protocol of keeping people, making sure that those people who do get sick are away from the team as quick as possible.
Citi knows the COVID-19 pandemic is intensifying the threat of hunger for millions of people across the country. That's why they're donating $2.5 million to support World Central Kitchen Chefs for America relief effort. You can visit wck.org to help and learn more. Guys, assuming that they're able to pull this off, and I know we all hope that they are able to do this safely, let's get into some actual baseball discussion, some actual Mets discussion. We started talking a little bit about the DH, how the Mets are set up to utilize that. Ideally, and let's assume that Cespedes is a player that can be at, close to 100% and play the field. Ideally, how do the Mets best utilize that position? Keith?
Ron, you go. You run with it.
The left field position, you mean, right?
No, DH.
DH position. Well, listen, we're assuming that Cespedes is going to be healthy, right? When they start July, that'll be the 2-year anniversary of the last time he put on a uniform and played. So, or about that. So that's a big assumption. You have to remember that DH position also, Robbie Cano is going to need some time off his legs and not in the field. Although of all the players, remember when Curtis Granderson was with the Mets, sometimes veteran players are better equipped to play every single day, and Cano loves to play every day. Excuse me. But I think, because of the 60-game truncated season, I would go with the hot hand. Let's assume that Cespedes can't play every day. If he can't play every day or DH every day, of all the guys there, I would go with the hot hand. If J.D. Davis is hitting lefties and righties, I'd have him there every day. So.
I think Gary brought it up that the Dodgers are in the same boat as the Mets, and they have a lot of talent. To me, it's a positive because without the DH, you're looking at Luis Rojas trying to figure out how do I get these guys in and keep them fresh, because the Mets have this abundance of talent. Now you've got an extra guy in the lineup that you can keep them in rhythm and get more playing time. I think it answers a lot of questions and problems that the Mets were going to have as far as utilizing their very good bench. It's an extra player in the lineup.
And with the DH also, you don't need as much bench. You're not pinch hitting as much as you would in a National League traditional situation. So I think that also affects your roster construction, right? If you're going to have a 30-man roster on opening day, they were going to have limits on pitchers. Now there are no limits. So you might go with a 16-man pitching staff or 17-man pitching staff on opening day because you figure that pitchers aren't going to be able to go deep into games coming out of a shortened spring training. So there are so many things like that. You know, when you put together your 60-man roster, do you put all your top prospects on the alternate at the alternate site so that you can sneak them in or at least get them some work because the minor leagues aren't going to be playing? There are a lot of decisions that these teams are going to need to be making and making very, very soon, trying to figure out how you best manipulate your team, your lineup over the course of this very short season.
Well, here's another decision that the Mets have to make, and it's less about roster construction and more about how to utilize their talent in the back end of that bullpen. Last year, we saw that Edwin Diaz got a lot of rope, and he probably deserved a decent amount of that rope given his track record. You don't have that luxury this year. You can't give, Edwin Diaz 3 weeks to find it. It's a third of the season. So when you look at the back end of that bullpen, what is the challenge that's in front of Rojas trying to get all his horses going, but at the same time, knowing that you really can't afford to wait too long with any of those guys at the back end of the pen?
Steve, I think it's really a too bad outing stretch that can knock you out of being a closer. I mean, that's really where you are right now. So if Diaz in the beginning, when we're in July into August, looks like he did 2 years ago, then you let it fly. If he looks like he did last year, you're going to have to do what they did with him last year at the end of the year, and that's find some spots for him to get some outs because Lugo can get the outs when he needs to. He's probably one of the more talented and versatile pitchers in that bullpen. And, one of the underrated signings, I think, was Porcello and Walker, right? With Noah Syndergaard going down, those two guys are going to be the fourth and fifth starter or with Steven, however you want to mix it. But, Seth can't go every day. So you're going to have to find someone else. So it behooves the Mets somehow to figure out how to get Edwin Diaz pitching like he did 2 years ago.
Then I agree. And also, too, you've got Familia, who's closed before. So, and he's lost weight. He had a bad year last year. What happens if he rebounds? And you've got Betances. You got three guys that have closed. And, Diaz could be on with the 60 games, as Ronnie said, on a very short leash.
It's always the case that bullpens are the most questionable things about teams because you never know. And I think for this particular bullpen, the questions are even greater than usual because you have Diaz coming off a bad year, because you have Familia coming off a bad year, because you have Betances coming off no year. And I think he's the biggest wild card of all. If Betances can pitch the way he did during that 4-year stretch when he was making the All-Star team every year, you've got an enormous bonus and a guy who can even potentially close games for you if Diaz struggles. But you don't know that, and he certainly wasn't looking like that guy when we saw him during spring training before things were shut down. His velocity was way down, and I know that had been his pattern earlier in his career, but you don't know coming off a season on the sidelines whether he's going to be able to bounce back. And I think it's going to be true of a lot of teams because of the start and stop nature of spring training and now summer training and then a short stretch going into the season. I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty about how ready a lot of these guys are going to be to compete at the level they need to when the bell rings in a month.
And don't sleep on Justin Wilson. Maybe he can get you some big outs too. He was outstanding, except for that short time that he had some elbow issues.
He may be more of a sure thing than anything else in that bullpen right now.
Right.
Him and Seth Lugo. Ronnie, Gary just touched on it a little bit, but do you think that Mets fans truly understand the potential that they have in Betances if he can return to the form that we've seen him most of his career?
I think Mets fans would know it better than any other fans, because if you live in New York and you love your ball club, the one across the way you're always keeping your eye on. And Betances has been not only a top-notch relief pitcher, he's been one of the best in baseball when he was at his best. Now, this time off, we'll see. I think Gary makes the great point is that a lot of this time off is going to work in a positive way, right? Michael Conforto gets over his injury, Cespedes has more time. But the negative part about it is that, you know, we see on social media a lot of the players showing that they're staying in shape and they're hitting off the tee and they're throwing and they're running and all of those things. And then there's other social media where you don't see anyone doing anything. So I think the evaluation, and I said it before on our show here, I think the evaluation of who's been doing something and who hasn't really done anything is going to be a really important part of seeing who's going to get out of the gate quick. Now, we don't even talk about, and I think Betances fits in this model. There's perennially these players that get off to slow starts. They've always had tough Aprils their entire career. It's going to be interesting to see the season starting in July if they still have that same issue because the games are just starting. I don't know.
You know, Ronnie, one thing that I find interesting is you assume that early in the season that starters aren't going to be able to go very deep because they haven't had a lot of ramp up time. But when we get into September and you've got pitchers who are used to throwing 170, 180 innings who aren't going to get close to that, are they going to be able to push these guys more? In other words,
yeah,
because innings limits are never going to be a consideration, would you see more playoff type strategy where maybe you bring a starter out of the bullpen between starts in September because you're not worried about innings limits?
Yeah, I think you're right, Gary. You bring up the great points. I think there's a few things that are going to happen for pitchers. There's going to be some injuries that are going to happen throughout the league. It's just a natural chain of events because you're starting different. I think guys right out of the block are going to surprise you. I think you're going to see Jacob deGrom's, the elite guys, are going to be going 7+ innings right from the get-go. I believe that. The bad part about that is watch to the middle of August, maybe towards the end of August. Every pitcher in baseball is going to go through a little dead arm period because they've been trying to ramp it up so quickly. The adrenaline's going to take over. And for the 5 or 6 starts, they're going to be rocking and rolling. But everyone's going to go through a little dead arm period. And I think what's going to kick in late, though, is exactly what you were talking about. Without those 150 innings under their belt, that September, you're going to see guys as fresh as they've ever been and throwing probably more innings in September than they probably ever have in their career.
Keith, let's talk some hitting for a second, because a guy like Michael Conforto and Ron was just talking about how one of the benefits is he's in all likelihood 100% ready to go to start the season. You look up every year at the end of the season, and Conforto's numbers are great. They really are. And yet, if you watch him on a day in, day out basis, and quite frankly, if you speak with him, you get the feeling that there's still more there. He feels that way. We feel that way watching him. When you look at his years, what does he need to do to reach that level of consistency so that those valleys don't stay as prolonged as they have in the past, and he can maybe turn it up an extra level?
Well, we'll make one note. We're talking about a guy who had over 30 home runs last year.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
I understand what you're saying. Not like, he hit 15 home runs or 18 home runs. What I've seen from Michael, he's had trouble with off-speed stuff, off-speed breaking stuff, the changeup, and with the left-hander, that they keep the ball away from him with breaking ball, it gives him trouble. Those are the adjustments that you make. You either learn to hit them, or they're going to keep feeding them to you until you prove you can. So that's all part of us up in the booth watching the progress of these guys as the years go by. We'll see how he makes the adjustment, if he does. I know that they're going to throw him breaking balls. The elite pitchers, there's always all the pitchers in Major League, in National League, we'll just say the National League. There's a lot of so-so pitchers in the middle you can scarf up on, but you always, like Gary always says, Gary likes to look at all the hitters and how they hit against the elite pitchers. Gary likes to make his that's a big plus for that player. And obviously, Jim Cott told me that Tony Oliva was not only a great hitter, but Tony Oliva, and for you folks out there, Minnesota Twins batting title, should be in the Hall of Fame. His career was shortened because of bad knees. But Jim Cott always said he hit the elite pitchers and in the clutch. And that's what we'll see from Michael. He's made a decision, and I think to hit home runs. The game has changed. And I really felt when he came up that he had a chance to be using the whole field and that gap to gap with power. There's not a ballpark that can hold him, that he had a chance to be hitting the high 300s. But he's become a pull hitter, and he's become a power hitter. And it fits in with the personnel of this ball club. He's in the middle of that lineup. You got a right, left, right with him in the middle. He's protecting the guy in front, and he's got a protection in the back, on the back side. So I was against him pulling, but now the way the club is put together, I think it was the right thing to do. And we'll see if he adjusts to this.
Steve, I think the best way, and I agree with Keith 100%, the best way to judge if Conforto's made the next journey and he elevates his game is that a lineup comes out against an elite left-handed starter, let's say Kershaw, someone else, and he's not batting seventh, which he did a lot last year against left-handed pitching. If he elevates his game, he stays in the middle of that lineup, and that means they're a better team.
And also, too, though, is that even, let's just say he struggles against left-handers. He's still one hanging breaking ball away from hitting the ball in the upper deck. So it's not like he's a serious power threat up there. And you just can't throw a get me over breaking ball with him. You've got to be very, very precise in your pitches when you go out, when you attack him. And they're going to hang him. And when you hang one, he's going to lose it.
And of course, the other question for Michael and every power hitter in baseball is, which baseball are we going to be playing with this year? Is it going to be last year's regular season ball that was like a golf ball? Or is it going to be last year's postseason ball, which was more like a wet rag? I would assume that if baseball is making a choice, and they will deny it to the high heavens, that in this particular season, they will go even more toward the golf ball if they are actually choosing, because let's face it, there's a need for something to juice the game right now with all the negativity that surrounds what got us to this point. So it'll be interesting to see, and it'll be hard for us to see too, especially since we're not going to be on site in the road games, because it's harder to tell on television whether the ball is juiced. Much easier if you're watching the game with the naked eye, because you can see the way the ball comes off the bat and see the reaction of the fielder. But you'll see it in the numbers too. We'll know pretty early what they've decided to do.
Yeah.
One hitter who it shouldn't really matter if the ball is juiced at all is Jeff McNeil. But we did see two very different versions of Jeff McNeil last year. Both were incredibly productive, just in different ways. The first half, high average, not as much power. The second half, much more power, but the average, while still good, it dipped well below where he was, where it looked like he was competing for a batting title much of the season. Is there a middle ground for him, Keith, or should he really try, in your mind, to be that guy in the beginning of the year that in this day and age is so unique in Major League Baseball?
I don't think he changed really anything in the second half, and he hit all those home runs and never hit home runs in the minor leagues. He's getting older. He's got tremendous knowledge of the strike zone. He's very focused. I just think it was a natural progression for him. I didn't see him alter his swing, get more of a lift. I did not see the lift. You throw the ball down on his knees, he's a golfer. He can golf it out of the ballpark. I think that's what's happened. You've got to pitch him, the good hitters, you got to pitch up and in. You got to pitch Jeff up and in. So I don't think he has to change a thing. We've seen him even with the 17 home runs in the second half. Was it 17? We also saw him as 2-strike hitting going the other way. And so he's very disciplined. So I just think it's just all of a sudden, it's amazing how you got a guy that comes up in the minor leagues and has no power, shows no power, and then he gets to the big league level, and boom, all of a sudden he gets into a bigger body and stronger, and he becomes much better than he was in the minor leagues. So I don't see anything that he has to do differently. I just hope that he stays focused, and that we know him and we do our interviews. He's like tunnel vision. I don't think he's going to start doing this. I think he's going to stay right on point.
I think Keith made a great point, guys, is that in the beginning of the season, let's say the first half, the way they tried to get McNeil out, I was watching, is away and play him away. And I'm not talking about the infield because they don't do that. I'm talking about the outfielders. Play him away, pitch him away. But the second half of the season, and Keith is right, they tried to go to a place around the hands inside where they thought they can get him out. The problem is that when you miss trying to go inside to jam a hitter, that all of a sudden that double or single sometimes turns into the home run because it's on the pull side. So, I think that's why he had the two different second halves. Welcome back.
Well, my battery, I got 10% of my battery. Oh my God.
Oh, we got to hustle up here then.
But what's amazing about the two halves for McNeil, if you look at his overall numbers, his OPS was over 900 in the first half, and it was over 900 in the second half. He just got there differently. But the question to me is, Keith, whether he can hit home runs at the level he did in the second half while maintaining his batting average from the first half. Is that something that you think he's capable of, or is it an either or?
I think he's a terrific hitter. I think he's one of the, and remember last year too, Gary, it was his first full season in the big leagues. He had the great finish 2 years ago. So he was starting his maiden voyage of one season. It's a different ball game than getting called up in August or July or June. You start the season fresh. So I think he got warmed up as the season went on. He's in a lineup where he doesn't have to hit home runs. This team has plenty of power. I've liked him in the 2-hole because he's a left-hand hitter. I like Nemo leading off because he walks. He's a better steal threat. And Jeff is very good. I think he even said it on the interview with us that the first baseman holding the runner on, it's easy for me to hit it right in the hole and set up first and third. So it's hard for me to answer that question. He's a 300 hitter. And whether he hits 25 home runs or he hits 15, he's going to hit 300. And I think he's going to be a very strategic hitter.
Hit 25 this year, you'll lead the league in all probability.
Well, that's true. Excuse me.
Although there's one hitter in history who hit 30 in the first 60 games of a season, and that was Bonds in his record-setting year.
I was going to say Reggie Jackson.
Yeah, Bonds hit 32 in the first 60 games in 2001.
Wow.
Yeah, the only guy ever to do it.
Citi knows the COVID-19 pandemic is intensifying the threat of hunger for millions of people across the country. That's why they're donating $2.5 million to support World Central Kitchen's Chefs for America relief effort. You can help too. Visit wck.org to learn more. Keith, I don't want your battery to run out.
I'm going to plug in right now. Hold on.
Great. All right. While Keith's working on this, the one guy that I did want to talk about that I feel like just constantly flies under the radar is Ahmed Rosario. You talk about Pete Alonso and Jacob deGrom and McNeil and Conforto, but Ahmed Rosario had about as good a second half as anyone on that team, as anyone in the league, really. He was right up there in so many categories. This is a guy that was once the top prospect in baseball. Given what you saw in the second half of last season, does it feel like now he is ready to get to the place full time, really, that he was always expected to be?
Well, I don't know. I'll take exactly what he gave you last year. In that lineup, with that team, the defensive game that he showed, especially in the second half or last 4 months of the season, I think you would print that up to have that kind of player. When he first came up, and maybe you guys can correct me, I could be wrong, but I think a lot of the people in the Mets hierarchy really not only were talking about his great talent, but also talked about his intelligence as a player. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why he has been able to plug up some of those deficient areas in his game. It's maybe that intelligence, that baseball intelligence now has helped him get better in a lot of different areas. The ability to hit the ball the other way. In a year where everyone is hitting home runs last year, he started to go line drives the opposite way. I think it fits his game much better, even though he hit some home runs. His two-strike hitting improved exponentially. His chase rate improved exponentially. And of course, the glove, like I talked about. So I think across the board, he showed great improvement in all areas. And I think you really should be commended for that.
He really upped his game. And remember, guys, was it 2 years ago, Gary, or was it last year? No, it was 2 years ago. In that second half of the season, some coach or player got in his ear. In that second half of the season, it was 2 years ago, he started running out ground balls, everything hard, and it lifted his entire game. Also, you got to give the Met coaching staff, Gary DiSarcino, credit, working with him in the field. And Rosario wants to better himself in the field. He was weak with the backhand. He's improved on his backhand. He's become much more steady. And I thought he became much more steady in the field. And his offense has come around. It's been a real joy to watch his progression in such a rapid period of time on a big league level.
I think in some ways, Keith, you even understate the improvement he made defensively, because if you remember early last season, there was talk about moving him to center field. That's how bad his defense was early last year. And, some of it had to do with pre-pitch preparation, which you're right, Gary DiSarcino did an amazing job with him of getting him more ready, getting him in the right position. But I think also it was a mindset. I think there was something going on mentally with Ahmed that he just didn't seem to have the same confidence in the field. And there's also an imperative for him because, he's got a couple of really good prospect shortstops breathing down his neck in this organization now. I know Andres Hernandez has not hit as well as the Mets had hoped, but they think that he will. But he's already defensively major league ready. And Ronnie Mauricio may be an even better prospect who's a couple of years away. So, and don't think that Ahmed doesn't know that. And it may be that there's a place for all three of those guys on the field, but that he wants to be the shortstop on this team for the long term. And I think that we saw a level of consistency from him in the field the second half of last year. The bat, I don't think, has ever been in question, and he's become only a better hitter. As Ronnie mentioned, the ability to go to right center has been huge because he's not only going to right center, he's going to right center with power. He's a big, strong kid for a shortstop. And he's, it's been unfortunate for Ahmed because he gets compared to some other young shortstops who arrived on the scene more fully ready to achieve star status. And it's taken him a few years, but I think he's there now. And I think he's at a point now where he can be talked about in that upper echelon of shortstops, maybe not the top 2 or 3, but certainly in the top 6 or 7. And if he can maintain the level of consistency we saw the second half last year for a full season or 60 games, I think that he'll be right there.
It really is amazing when you think about it, just over the last year plus, how different the narrative has become with the Mets offensive homegrown players. I mean, what they've been able to do between Rosario and McNeil and Alonso. I mean, you just look up and down this lineup, and now with the addition of the DH, I mean, this is a pretty darn formidable lineup and an exciting group of young players that for a team that was for so long, all we did was talk about the pitching. Now it's flipped. It's about these young hitters, this young core. That's really what it is now.
And you can
You know,
really
some-
you can really add Nimmo to that that equation too, because I think people forgot about him for a good portion of last year while he was hurt, but he's still a big piece in center field for them.
Yeah, and sometimes you got to get lucky a little bit too. I mean, let's not forget, a couple of seasons ago, Pete was coming off one of the best AAA seasons, AA, AAA seasons you could have, and they were afraid to bring him up because of his defensive problems. McNeil was a guy that was often hurt and was not even considered a prospect, and then he showed some power in AAA and got his call up. JD is a trade for a guy that had a brilliant collegiate career. He was a guy that you knew had a lot of talent, but he hadn't showed it when he was at Houston, and those little small snippets that he had with that ball club. So, to get those guys to not only come and be viable players, but not only that, be maybe future stars of your team, I think is a great testament to the scouting, but also a testament to those individuals.
I got a question for you guys. With the DH, and if Cespedes is healthy, how does Dom Smith ever get any at-bats on this team? What's going to happen? How does he get at-bats when you're not going to be pinch hitting, and if Cespedes is ready to play?
He doesn't. That's a simple question. A simple answer. He does not. He will take some at-bats late in the game, I guess, as a pinch hitter when the Mets are behind, at-bats like that. But he won't get any real meaningful at-bats, I don't think, if Cespedes is healthy. And that's an unfortunate thing for Dom.
Yes, I agree. And whenever you put him out in left field, I kind of cringe because he's a liability out in left field. He's not a very mobile guy, although whatever he can get to, he made nice plays last year, but he's going to be a liability. It's so critical for this team with the corner outfielders that Conforto, they don't cover a lot of ground, and that's why I think the Mets are so really focused on getting having a center fielder that can cover the ground for the two corner outfield positions. And I'm not saying that they're butchers out there, but we're talking range. So there's a lot of pressure on the center field. And I don't think Nimmo, they criticize Nimmo about his defense. He doesn't get great breaks on the ball, but he can make up with it with his speed. I think he plays a very adequate center field as far as covering the ground. But I'm straying off the path here. Dom Smith is and he seems to be content. He's a team guy. He's happy pinch hitting. It's a tough role. You have to want to do that. And if you're one of those players that, I want to play every day, and he understands you got a guy hit 50 plus home runs at first base. So he's making the most of his situation. And maybe down the road, it might be best for Dom to get traded where he can play every day for someone else.
I mean, think about it. In a DH league, look at the Mets lineup on days that Ramos catches. Who are you pinch hitting for?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not pinch hitting for anybody in that lineup, except maybe in a lefty-righty kind of a situation. There's no, I mean, if Nito catches, you're going to bat for him, but, Ramos is going to play 2/3 of the games, and there's nobody in the lineup that you're going to pinch hit for.
The one thing to add, though, is if Cespedes is healthy is a huge if. And if he's not healthy, if he can't play, or if he is healthy enough to play but can't perform to the level that we're used to seeing as he hasn't played in a couple of years, then Dom Smith becomes potentially a critical everyday piece. So it's really potentially feast or famine when it comes to Dom Smith this season.
Well, Dom will be your insurance, and you might have to cash that in at some point.
Right.
And if not, he's got a broadcast future, and you've honed that in him, Steve.
Well,
by the way, I just want to say the interview that you did with Dom talking about his experiences in Black Lives Matter, it was fantastic. You asked great questions. He gave unbelievable, heartfelt answers. I thought he really presented himself so incredibly well, and I was so proud of him. It was really wonderful to watch.
Well, Gary, I appreciate you saying that. And for those of you out there who are watching this live right now, that interview is going live on our website on sny.tv at 5 o'clock. So in a little less than 10 minutes. And I can't implore you enough to watch it. It was a heartbreaking conversation to have, but it was an incredibly important one and an incredibly necessary one. And I don't know how Dom was able to hold it together and articulate himself in that way, given just some of the impossible to describe things that he's had to deal with in his life. But I implore everybody to watch that interview if you get some time. It's going live on the website at 5 o'clock, and it'll be there, living there for quite a while.
Well, Steve, make sure we're off, because that's more important than us being jabronis.
Well, let's sign off then now. Once again, for Gary, Keith, and Ron, this is another edition of Beyond the Booth Live. Thanks so much for joining us. See you soon.